Hello, listeners, and welcome to this week's episode of The Cult Vault. I'm your speaker, Casey, and before we dive into this episode, I just wanted to let you all know about a little giveaway that I am running. I have 2 pairs of weekend taster tickets for CrimeCon UK taking place on the 11th and 12th of June in London to give away to some lucky winners. Come and join me and hundreds of others at the UK's biggest true crime event with tickets worth £195. All you have to do to enter the giveaway is email me at cultvaultpodcast@gmail.com and tell me your favourite episode or conversation from the show. The giveaway ends on Sunday the 29th of May, so get your email sent to me as soon as possible. There are also limited guest tickets still available at crimecon.co.uk where you can use the code CULT to get 10% off your tickets right now. Today, I chat with John about his experiences converting to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and the struggles with leaving behind such a high-demand religious group. I hope that you will all appreciate John's wisdom and knowledge as much as I have. Here is John. So hello, John, and thank you so much for agreeing to come and chat with me today. I am really looking forward to adding some more information to the show about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Would you like to start by introducing yourself to the listeners?
Yeah, certainly. Thanks for having me. Like you said, my name is John. I am a software developer by trade. I'm an advocate for the free software and open culture movements. But I am also as you mentioned, a former member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And so as such, I've also kind of become more involved in kind of helping people to recognize high demand control groups, how to spot the signs, and how to exit should that be something that they want to do. But I'm not really as well versed in all of that as I am the other stuff. So I definitely feel I'm qualified for that.
Well, some of the sources that you've been sending me through over the last couple of months of our correspondence has been so incredibly helpful. And I am really eager to bring some of that into this episode today so that some of the listeners may be able to go and access that stuff that you've sent me over. And of course, we will make it accessible somehow, either in the episode description or listed on the sources on the Cult Vault website. But in terms of software development, that sounds really exciting. Can you give us any examples of things that you've worked on, or what types of software you are involved in actually bringing to life?
A lot of it is, right now I'm working a tech support job. I had gone out and started doing some freelance work doing that. I was previously working for a software development firm that did stuff for other people, and then I decided to just kind of branch off on my own and do that. That was going pretty well until COVID happened and it started getting hard to turn invoices into cash. So I decided that I'd take something else in the meantime. But I have done, there was a large auto manufacturer that I wrote some training software for instance. There was a cleaning company that wanted some COVID compliance stuff done, but that's one of the ones that kind of fell through a little bit. But mostly the stuff that I do right now is just for my own kind of enrichment stuff that I think that is interesting. I've been doing a lot of stuff with something called Gemini, which is kind of like a lightweight replacement for the web, because there's a lot of tracking and whatnot, although it doesn't really completely replace the web. But it's a fun little side project. And most of the stuff that I'm working on lately have been just kind of personal side projects.
Been sending me links to your blog as well. I'm guessing that you include that as part of one of your smaller personal hobbies.
Yeah. I mean, it's nothing fancy. It's just kind of plain HTML and CSS. There's no JavaScript, no big framework, but that was kind of a deliberate choice. Again, because I'm not a big fan of the way that the web kind of collects information on people and tracks and everything. I try to, in my own projects, to be as respectful and of people's individual privacy, and helping people to find more private ways of communicating is kind of a passion of mine.
There's probably so many layers to unpick in what you've just said. Firstly, I find it very frustrating, that every time you visit a new website, it asks whether it can store your information. And if you say no, then the website's kind of like, well, you can't use the website then.
Yeah.
And secondly, the documents are not user friendly if you were to read through what's actually happening with your information. I feel like they're purposefully written so that you don't understand what's happening to your information. And thirdly, I wonder if your passion around people's privacy comes from the experiences that you've had and how everything should be black and white for people and they should know exactly what they're getting into before they click accept, if that makes sense.
It's definitely been highlighted by that. My passion for cryptography and privacy kind of predates my involvement with Mormonism.
Right.
But there's a joke I heard, and it's not really that much of a joke, where the biggest lie that people ever tell is I have read and agreed to the terms of service.
I think there's a really good South Park episode about that where they click sign to the update the iOS or update the iTunes settings, and they end up in, I don't know, some kind of situation. But in terms of your personal story in a high demand religious group, we are, as you mentioned, here to talk about your tenure within the LDS Church. And for anyone else who hasn't tuned into this podcast before, would you say you were part of the Mormon faith or the LDS faith? And why is that an interesting question for me to ask?
Yeah, so I usually say Mormon because much to the chagrin of the current president of the church, mostly because I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, is really a mouthful. And everybody knows them as the Mormons anyway. That was, and we may get into that more at some point. When I first learned about the church and the missionaries told me that they were from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, I had no idea that meant that they were Mormon, and I'm sure that that's by design.
The Mormon faith is more prevalent in some parts of America than others. So would you say that you were in one of these parts of America when you converted over to Mormonism, or were you in an area that is not so enriched with the Mormon faith?
I'm actually in Canada, but
I had absolutely no idea.
Yeah, sorry, I don't think it ever came up.
I couldn't hear that with Janice Selby, the counsellor on religious trauma, when I spoke to her as well. She was over in Canada and I had absolutely no idea. Being in England, I can't make that distinction. It's really bizarre. Right. So
I can't make the distinction either, honestly.
So you're over in Canada.
Yeah.
What is the Mormon faith like in terms of numbers? Are there areas that are more condensed with people that align themselves with the Mormon faith or the LDS faith, or is it kind of few and far between?
Well, the area that I'm in, I'm about an hour west of Toronto, and they're really not that prevalent here. Although, I mean, there are a surprising number of Mormons here, but I imagine that's probably true everywhere. But out in areas like Alberta, for instance, there are a lot of Mormons out in Alberta. British Columbia too, I think, has a lot of them as well, and that's where a lot of the fundamentalist Mormons are, I believe, in some areas in British Columbia.
After all of the research that you've done unpacking your experience since you've left the LDS Church, and maybe we're kind of jumping around a bit in terms of talking about your experiences in a chronological sense, would you happen to know about when there was a surge of people aligned with the Mormon faith jumping over to Canada? Is there a moment in history where that happened? It's just really interesting for me to kind of hear that you're not in America, you're not in, the Bible Belt, you're not in Utah, you're not near Salt Lake City, and still you converted over to Mormonism at some point in your life.
I'm not sure exactly when it happened. I know Historically, they've liked to use more in the past, and with the fundamentalists more recently, where they've liked to kind of settle along borders between countries, so that when the feds show up, they can just kind of like hop over the border and be out of their jurisdiction, that sort of thing. But I'm not sure exactly when or why they moved out to Canada.
So you're in Ontario. Would you say that is a pretty prevalent area for Mormons, or is it
not
like made up of various different faith-based movements?
Mormons really aren't that prevalent here. I was, and we'll get into this. We'll get into this later. I'm sure I was actually raised Catholic, and I would say that that's much more. Right. I wouldn't say it's predominantly Catholic, but there's definitely a lot more Catholics here than there are Mormons, I would say.
This is going to be so interesting, learning about your life and your experiences when Mormonism is not the predominant faith-based movement in your area.
Yeah.
I know that you have so much to tell us about specific rituals and practices within the Mormon faith as well. So if you weren't born into the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and you were raised Catholic, how is it that you found Mormonism and converted?
So I like we've mentioned, I was raised Catholic, but we weren't super crazy like devout Catholic. We were kind of when I was younger, it's more so the case where we go to church every Sunday and whatnot. As I got older, I became kind of more and more agnostic, largely because I found that within the framework of my understanding of Catholicism, there were some questions that I had that they really didn't have good answers to. And that actually kind of ended up being one of the big drawing factors for the Mormon Church. Like one of the big questions that I had that I'm not aware of an answer to in Catholicism was this whole concept of, so you need to accept Jesus and you need to be baptized and do all of these things to get into heaven. Most Christian denominations will agree with this. But what happens to the guy who was born, 100 years ago in some far off country who's never even heard of the name Jesus Christ, right? Is he damned to hell just because nobody ever told him? Like that never struck me as something that a just and loving God would do. It just didn't make any sense to me. And I didn't really find any good answers to that question in Catholicism. And that, and along with a bunch of other things, kind of made me cool to it a little bit. And I was always taught by my parents to listen to as many different viewpoints as you possibly can. So when I finally I ran into missionaries on my way home from work one day. And when they started talking to me and I started asking my questions, that was one of the questions that they had an answer to that actually made sense.
Right.
In Mormonism, they have, if you haven't had the essential saving ordinances done during your lifetime, they do a lot of research into like people who've died, and they will go and they will get lists of these people and they will perform these ordinances for them in the temple so that they then in the afterlife under Mormon doctrine will have the option to accept or reject it, and so they don't lose out on their chance just because nobody ever told them. And I thought that was a really, really elegant solution to that problem that had never really occurred to me. Now, there has been some controversy over things like they've done proxy work for Holocaust survivors and so forth, and their families kind of got upset about that, as you might imagine that they would, because they died for their religion and so forth. And then the Mormon Church comes along and says, "Hey, you're Mormon now." That didn't go over well, but it's well-meaning, I think, or at least I felt at the time, and I hadn't really considered that. And so that really was appealing to me, actually, that they had answers to a lot of the questions that I had been looking for answers to and hadn't been able to. So that was one of the things that kind of piqued my curiosity.
So how is it that you were able to hear about this particular piece of scripture or rhetoric around the Mormon faith? Did you meet someone who introduced you to Mormonism? Did you go to a church?
I was actually I was at the bus stop. Actually, I didn't have a car at the time, and I was on my way home from work, and a missionary just approached me at the bus stop and started talking to me.
Right.
And me being me, I'm like, okay, yeah, you want to talk about your religion? I'm more than happy to talk about that. So we just kind of had a little bit of a conversation. He asked if I'd be willing to give him my number so that we could talk later, which I did. Funnily enough, I remember thinking at the time, why did I do that? Now I'm never going to get rid of these guys. And I never heard from the guy again. It wasn't until a couple of months later when I guess my name had been taken down in an area book, and some other missionaries got a hold of it, and they reached out to me several months later and said, hey, we noticed you were talking with our friend. Would you like to carry on that discussion? So yeah.
Did you ever find out what happened to the guy at the bus stop? Have you ever seen him since?
Maybe, I don't even remember what his name was. It's weird to me that I only saw one, and they usually go out. There's usually two of them. I don't know where the other one was. I don't know whether he was breaking the rules or I just didn't notice his companion or whatever. But I don't remember his name. He probably got transferred. It happens every couple of weeks. They shuffle missionaries around for reasons that I don't fully understand. But it's supposedly by inspiration. You're needed here now. You go here. You go there. That sort of thing.
Right. So you're in a bus stop. You're just waiting to get the bus home, and somebody approaches you and you say, I'm an open-minded guy. I would like to hear more. So you take that first step and actually nobody calls you back for a period of time.
Yeah, which was really surprising. But I was like, at least I don't have to worry about getting rid of them, right?
And when you are finally contacted by some other people who pick up your contact details, how does that communication go?
So that one was kind of interesting. Apparently, the missionaries who picked up my name, for whatever reason, thought that I was Chinese.
Right.
So because apparently Lamut is a very Chinese-sounding name, I guess. But so it was the Chinese-speaking missionaries who came and talked to me, and I had a meeting with them at a local coffee shop. Tim Hortons, it's a coffee shop here. Most people, I assume, have at least heard of them. I don't know. It doesn't really matter. And it was in that meeting in that coffee shop where I saw the Book of Mormon for the first time. It was sitting out on the table when I sat down with them, and that's when I realized, oh no, that they're Mormons, right? And I realized that I didn't really know anything about them apart from third-hand whatever stories about polygamy, and the word cult had been thrown around, and I decided that I should, at least hear them out. I should at least sit down and hear what they have to say, and then evaluate for myself. And so I did that. They, in the very, very first meeting, they said something that really caught my attention. They gave me a copy of the Book of Mormon. They said, if you read from this book every day, and if you pray to God and you ask him to tell you whether or not it's true, he will tell you. And that sounded so at the same time absurd, but also really kind of, they had a lot of confidence to be able to say that. So I'm like, okay, well, I looked at it this way. I'm like, well, there are two possibilities here that I could see. The first possibility is it's a load of nonsense, which is what I expected. And then when I pray about it, nothing will happen and I can move on with my life as I want. The other option is what they're saying actually is true. And if that's the case, then it's probably the most important thing I'm ever going to hear. So I didn't take them up on that right away, but it definitely caught my attention. And by the time I did pray about it, I had at that time been conditioned sufficiently that I actually felt that I received a response. And that feeling that I received that I couldn't explain at the time was what carried me a lot of the way from there. Plus, there were some other coincidental things that happened afterwards that kind of fed into it. But
My goodness.
That's how that happened.
Perhaps these other people that you spoke to had a similar kind of experience if they were able to talk about this stuff so confidently in the way that they were coming across to you.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So
there was another funny kind of follow-up to that too. Because I wasn't Chinese, they then, without telling me, handed me off to another pair of missionaries. Now, this is the first time I've heard the word Mormon. I have polygamy and all this in my head. And then when I come to the next meeting, unbeknownst to me, 3 women show up. And I'm like, what's going on here? Obviously, the church doesn't practice polygamy, and that what was going on in my head that had me worried wasn't the case, but it was kind of a funny little miscommunication.
You're kind of wondering if you're going to get 3 offers for marriage in one short meeting.
I didn't know what was going on, but it definitely caught me off guard.
So you said that there was a period of time then between this meeting where you first came across the Book of Mormon, actually in its physical form, and sat down and spoke to people and realized that this was the Mormon faith. There was a space then between that meeting and you actually going to ceremonies or to Bible studies. How is it that you kind of had that little break and then ended up having this profound experience after so much thought reform? What happened in that space in between?
Yeah, so pretty much right away they invited me to start coming out to church with them. I was 27 at the time, so and
this
I wasn't
is the
married.
3 women.
So, yeah,
Right.
And I think the first set of missionaries invited me out to church too, but I had something going on that day and I wasn't able to make it out. But they did invite me out to church, and because I was 27 and unmarried, they decided to send me out to the young single adult branch that they had there. And when I came to that, all of a sudden I was just kind of flooded with, the love bombing that happens when a new person walks into the church. Every good Mormon goes over and says hello and greets them and whatnot. And I got to meet a lot of the people there, and it really kind of put a face on it. A lot of these people I still would consider friends to this day, because they're honestly they're good people, right? For the most part. I mean, in any group of people, you're going to have a couple of not so good people, but whatever. But I got to actually meet the people and put a face on it and find out that, these are people who are just like me. They have, they have hot thoughts and hopes and dreams and stuff that they want to do and interests and whatnot. And they didn't seem like they were in a cult. They seemed like just kind of like normal everyday people who just happened to go to this church. And
right.
So I made a lot of friendships there. I kept regularly meeting with the missionaries, because every time I would have a meeting with them, they would schedule the next one, and there would be these kind of like incremental steps. So they'd start off by saying things like, okay, now that you've been reading, and I took them up on that. I read that Book of Mormon every waking moment I had. I was glued to it because I was fascinated. I'd never seen it before, and I would take down notes, and I would and when I would meet them next, I'd have whole bunch of questions written down, which they thought was awesome and amazing, because they have such a hard time getting people to even read the book in the first place. They referred to me as a golden investigator. Apparently that happens now and again, where you get someone who just kind of takes to it really well. And every meeting there would be additional little things that they would ask me to do. So I remember one of the early things was when they taught me about what they call the word of wisdom. And I know that this gets into a question that you have later on, but where it talks about how you can't have alcohol or tobacco, which I was fine with, because I barely ever drink. I don't smoke anyway. No illegal drugs, which, also not a problem that I had. But then they said no coffee or tea, which caught me a little bit by surprise and was a little bit harder because I mean, I do love my coffee.
Yeah, and for listeners, we should point out that you've got a really awesome Worship Coffee Colts kind of t-shirt on right now as well, which kind of reinforces that point.
Yeah. And so I had to give up coffee and tea, but they told me that I was like, well, I'm willing to give this a try for a while, right? Like I'm not going to die without my coffee. And they said that every time they would ask me to do something, they would say, do this thing and then see what blessings follow. Now, when you do a thing and then you go looking for what are the good things that happened, you're going to find good things that happened, whether they had anything to do with the thing that you did or not. It's just like what your brain is looking for. And it would be kind of these incremental steps where they would say, you know, do this thing and look for the blessings, and do this thing and look for the blessings, until eventually they got to the point, and I don't remember whether this was before or after I prayed about the Book of Mormon, but they brought to me the law of tithing, which says that they made me ask me if I would be willing to make a commitment to give 10% of my income to the church.
Right.
I had a problem with this one because I had previously made some poor financial decisions, and I was in a fair bit of debt, and I had just gone to my bank and worked out a debt consolidation strategy where I was going to get everything paid off, and I had it all budgeted out, but it didn't leave me with any extra money at all. Like I could cover my bills, I could cover this debt payment and like a little bit of food, and that was like it. And so when they asked me this, I kind of pushed back a little bit. I'm like, hey, look, you know what? You've asked me to do all these things, and I've done all these things, but I have a problem with this one. Let me explain to you what my problem is, because they've been really, you know, reasonable up to this point. And I'm like, right. I'm sure they're going to be like, okay, well, you know, we understand. Maybe we'll do that later. But instead, what they did was they said, you know what? We don't know how, but we promise you that, you know, if you obey the law of tithing, you will be blessed and it'll work itself out somehow. And okay, I said, I will do this. They said, you don't have to do this until you get baptized, but my baptism date had already been set from that point. The Sunday that I was baptized, I handed my first tithing check into the branch president. The Monday following, I went into work. I get someone from HR comes to my desk, says, hey, can you come into the office? We want to talk to you. And I go in there and they said, hey, we had this job posting that you had applied for. It was like an internal promotion. We've decided that we don't want to do that anymore because we're just going in a different direction. But we do see that you've been working for us a long time. We do see how hard you've worked for us. So we've decided we want to give you a raise anyway. And ding, 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 confirmation bias. All of a sudden, I'm like, well, they told me this would happen, and it happened. And from that point forward, I was like, okay, I'm in this thing. I got this, right? It was a thing that was going to happen anyway. It just so happened that the timing worked out that way, and they hooked me, right?
It's so tough. That is so tough. And there are so many different interviews that I've done that spring to mind at this like exact moment. As you said, that confirmation bias is just so strong in that moment. I just have Esther Friedman at the front of my mind when she ended up in Sharon Gann's esoteric school, and she was in a really low point in her life and was told if she practiced this work, her life would change. And she ended up, you know, finding love, finding employment, and everything just seemed to change in the first few months of her being involved in this group. And all of the credit was given to that school. And this feels exactly the same. How do you, the cognitive dissonance for you in that moment must have been extraordinary.
Oh, it was, because, and you know, and that's why, like, I'd been through this was a bigger one, but I've seen a number of these other coincidences too, that by the time that I actually sat down to actually pray about the Book of Mormon, I felt like I actually like it's so difficult sometimes to convey this sometimes, because looking at it from the outside, a person would look at you and be like, what, are you crazy? Like, you should seek medical attention. But I actually like heard words in my head, why are you praying about this? You already know it's true. And but it was all just that, looking back on it, it was all that mental condition, that kind of progressive step by step. They send missionaries out to this missionary training center before they go out on their mission, where they spend several months just isolating them from family and just drilling into them. Okay, this is the way that you talk to people. This is the first thing you say. This is the next thing that you say, and so on. And it's all very, very regimented, all very scripted. And they've been doing this for almost 200 years now. So they've really kind of gotten it to a fine art at this point. Most people see through it, but if you happen to catch it with the right set of circumstances, and it's
wow, that's an incredible experience for you to have. And the way that you said that you really studied the text, you threw yourself into it, you were making notes and almost like grade A student kind of material, which is also not unfamiliar with other people that have come on the show. People that have converted later on in life have been really passionate about joining a movement and wanting to show that they really do understand the text or the propaganda or the message of the movement, and really throw themselves in, dedicate so much time, and that was quite an interesting parallel to draw between your story and other people's, primarily not second or third generation people, but those who have joined later in life or converted in the same way that you did at 27. And you said that you had this really profound experience when you were praying about the Book of Mormon, and then your tithing starts and your baptism date was set. So did you go through your baptism before you started tithing?
No, they actually don't expect you to start tithing until you're actually a member of the church. They actually consider paying tithing to be a privilege that is only something that a church member can do. So if you go through, for instance, a disciplinary committee hearing and you're disfellowshipped and excommunicated, one of the punishments is that you're not allowed the blessing of paying tithing anymore.
Like in the Jehovah's Witnesses, we've had examples of people who are told that they're not committed enough to the faith, so they're no longer allowed to go pioneering.
Mm-hmm.
Getting up at 6-7 o'clock in the morning on weekends to go knocking door to door because people are off work, trying to convert them to the JW faith. That's a punishment, taking away someone's right to pioneering, which is another interesting parallel. How does your journey look in terms of the next steps of your integration into the Mormon Church? I know that you sent over really insightful information on your endowment ceremony. Is that what comes next for you to become sort of an air quotes fully fledged member of the Mormon Church, for you to be able to access the temple? Because I know there are some restrictions around who can and can't access certain parts of certain buildings and certain ceremonies and services. So can you talk us through sort of your journey chronologically, what the next steps were?
Yeah. So I mean, as much as they will tell you that everyone is the same in the church, no one is better than anyone else, it's definitely a very tiered church. So after I after I was baptized, actually very shortly thereafter, the next thing that they rushed through was they wanted to get me ordained to the priesthood. Because I'm male. If you're female, you don't have to worry about that pesky priesthood thing. Why would you want that? But so there are kind of two levels. There are a number of levels, but I get to skip over a bunch of them because of how old I was. First, they ordained me to the Aaronic priesthood, and then the next week they ordained me to the Melchizedek priesthood, and this was so that they could give me a calling. Everything in the church at the low levels anyway is done by volunteers. Now, I say that in air quotes because it's kind of more of a voluntold situation. Everyone from your bishop to the guy who cleans the toilets, nobody gets paid for any of that. Now, the higher leaders, they do pull in like six-figure salaries that they tried to keep that a secret for a very long time until that leaked, and that caused a mass exodus of people who were like, wait, what? You said no paid clergy. But anyway, they wanted me to become the branch clerk. And in order for that to happen, I needed to hold the Melchizedek priesthood. So they rushed that through. And then they actually forgot to interview me to tell me that they were calling me to this position. Normally what they'll do is you'll get a call from your bishop, or if it's a higher level calling, someone like from the stake or whatever, they'll call you up, they'll tell you they want to set up a meeting, and they won't tell you what the meeting is about. And they'll say, so when you go there, they'll extend a calling. They'll say, the Lord wants you to serve in such and such a capacity. Do you accept this calling? Which is kind of a loaded question, because the understanding is that, well, you can say no, but this isn't your bishop calling you. This isn't your stake president calling you. This is the Lord calling you through this person, and you have enough faith to do what the Lord is asking you to do, right? Like, He wouldn't ask you to do something that whom the Lord calls, He qualifies, they say, right? So there is a lot of pressure to actually accept these callings. So within about a month of my baptism, all of a sudden I was in charge of handling all of my local branch's finances, all the tithing checks. I had to count the money and deposit them at the bank, and a whole bunch of rules around that, because they're very, very protective of their money. Children, on the other hand, they can call you into a primary position with absolutely no training whatsoever. I've done both. It's very different things. They very much like to protect their money. Children are a little bit less prioritized in that. But anyway, so about a month in, I received this calling to be the ward clerk, and I stayed in that calling. I even moved to another ward when I turned 31 and couldn't be in the young single adult branch anymore, and I moved to the adult ward. Then all of a sudden they called me to be a clerk there too, so I just couldn't shake that calling. But about a year after that, because for the first year, I forgot. They also fairly quickly on, within a couple of weeks, got me what's known as a limited use temple recommend, so that I could attend the temple. With a limited use recommend, really all you can do is baptisms for the dead. And they would do these, in my branch, we would do these YSA trips to the temple, where the whole bunch of us would get together. We'd all have to have our temple recommend interviews to make sure that we're worthy to go to the temple. And then you go there and you essentially just get baptized over and over and over and over again on behalf of this whole big list of these names of people who've died and are having their ordinances done for them. And it's, I did that a lot, but that's really all you can do with a limited use recommend. You can only do these baptisms for the dead, essentially. About a year after, my branch president decided that, hey, you're progressing really nicely. It's been a year, so you can actually go and get your endowment. So I had to go through a series of you have to have 2 interviews to get your full temple recommend. And even once you get your endowment, I was never sealed in the temple. So you could argue that I was never a full-fledged member because I hadn't had that particular ordinance done. Plus, there's this other ordinance called the Second Anointing that's like super secret, and most Mormons don't even know that it
Oh my
exists.
goodness.
But I can give you sources on that if you want. That most of the general authorities receive, which basically, when you get your second anointing, you can essentially do no wrong, save for the shedding of innocent blood or the denying of the Holy Ghost. Your exaltation is made sure. So you can lie, cheat, steal, do whatever, and you're still guaranteed to get into heaven. So
as long as you don't reject a holy name or
as long as you don't deny
blood.
the Holy Ghost or spill innocent blood, you're good.
Oh my goodness.
Anything else is fair game. And most believing members don't even know that that's a thing. I had heard about it, but I had assumed that it was just anti-Mormon propaganda because I'd been told to be wary of that. But anyway, that's a whole other tangent. But so I got my my bishop decided that I was ready to get my endowment. So I had to go through a 2-month temple preparation course. This course teaches you nothing. It spends the whole time just kind of like getting you into this headspace of like, don't worry if you don't understand what's happening, just be there for the experience. It's all symbolic. As you continue to go, you'll get more and more further light and knowledge later on. You never get it. I went many times, never understood it any better than the first time through. I mean, I found things here and there, but I think it was just connections that I made in my brain that didn't actually mean anything. But so my bishop asks if I want to do this. I'm like, yeah, great. I've learned so much already. I want to keep learning. So I go through the temple preparation course, and then he's like, okay, now you have to call the temple and you have to book an appointment. So I give them a call. I say, hey, I need to book an appointment for my endowment. And they're like, okay, cool. Are you getting married or are you going on a mission? I'm like, no. And the nice lady who answered the phone, she's like, she was kind of caught off guard there for a minute. She's like, but you do have a signed temple recommend by your bishop and stake president, right? I was like, yes, I do. She's like, okay, fine, whatever. You're good then. So we booked the appointment. I go through for the endowment. I had to pick an escort to go with me. Just someone who's been through the ordinance before. It has to be of your same gender. And their purpose is there just to kind of go with you, to kind of walk you through everything so that you at least don't feel entirely lost with no idea what's going on, because weird stuff is going to happen, and they want to make sure that you've got someone there to make sure that you're okay. So I go, first thing I have to do when I get there is I have to go to the distribution center because I have to buy my temple garments. These are considered sacred garments, and since I don't have my endowment yet, I am not allowed to see them. But I have to buy them, and I have to wear them basically as underwear for the rest of my life. So they gave me some like samples of fabric. They showed me some like basic drawings of what they look like. So like, pick your style, we'll measure you for your size, and then we'll give you, the garments that you purchased, but you can't open them yet. You can't look at them yet. Wait for that. So I did that. And then I went through for the endowment itself. And that's kind of fun. They so you start out there's a point at the beginning. I don't remember the exact wording. I sent it to you, but at the beginning there's this whole thing where it's basically like, if you want to back out, they want to give the illusion that there's informed consent here. They're like, if anyone wants to back out rather than accept these sacred ordinances right now, please raise your hand and leave now. For most people, this happens right before they're about to get married or about to go on a mission. Both things are very, very, very big deals. And you're surrounded by family and friends, all of whom have done this, all of whom are expecting you to do this, and they're all expecting you to do this. And I mean, you can leave at this point now, but
You can't
it's
really.
calling off your mission, it's calling off your wedding, and you're going to be a social pariah probably for the rest of your life. So you have the option. You don't know what you're agreeing to, but you have the option.
So very in keeping with the language used earlier on in your experience when you were told about your calling, the same kind of implied subtext or expectation for you not to deny God's will.
Yeah, exactly. So then I go through and I make all of these covenants in a weird ceremony with weird clothing and now my Catholic upbringing might have been a thing that actually made this a little bit more palatable for me, because in Catholicism they have a lot of weird outfits and weird ceremonies where they like wave incense and all kinds of strange stuff that to an outsider would look insane. If you've not grown up around it, you might, and you've never seen it before, you might look at this and be like, what is going on here? So I kind of looked at it from that same sort of perspective where I'm like, well, this is kind of weird, but I likened it back to like, well, if I went to like a Catholic mass, never having seen it before, I might think the same kind of thing. Okay, so let's just let it happen. They warned me about this. They told me that it would be weird and that I would understand more later. And I took them up on it. I would go every week. The nearest temple to us is the nearest temple to where I am is the Toronto Temple, which is actually in Brampton, but it sounds nicer to call it the Toronto Temple. But I couldn't afford to go there every week, so I organized a carpool. I got a bunch of my friends together, and I'm like, "Hey, I want to go to the temple every Friday. If you want to meet up at the church, everyone chip in $5 for gas, and we can go every week." And that was very, very strongly encouraged. We had the stake president that we had at the time. He was very big on, if you're not going to the temple at least once a month, you're denying yourself blessings. If you can go once a week, that's even better, but at least once a month. And I'm like, well, I don't want to do just the minimum, right? Like if he suggests once a week, how can I make that happen? So I got people together and I arranged it all so that I could actually make that happen. And I enjoyed it. I mean, it was weird, but like it got to be like a routine. I've mentioned this off camera, but I have ADHD. And so anything that puts kind of routine and structure in my life can be very beneficial for me. And I don't want to say this from, this is a weird thing about it too, is that Mormonism, my experience in it, it wasn't a bad experience. There were things that were helpful and even enjoyable to me. There were parts that were less so, but which is why I don't subscribe to like just trying to like get everybody out of the church, because there are circumstances and whatnot where it's actually a good experience for people, even if whatever. I heard someone once say that for them the traumatic part about their journey in Mormonism wasn't the Mormonism itself; it was the finding out that it was all lies where the trauma came in, and that was very much the case for me.
I feel like we hear that a lot with things like Christianity as an umbrella and the branches that exist off of it. They're not inherently bad on their own, but it's the people in positions of power or the more branch fringe extremist groups, sort of the more you funnel down the umbrella of Christianity or any major world religion, I imagine is very in keeping with this as well. The more dangerous the belief systems become, the more insular the communities are, the more manipulation, coercion, and exploitation you may see with individuals that follow these movements. So obviously, the religious texts that we explore and discuss on this show, they are not inherently bad on their own. It all depends on how they are used by people, how they are interpreted, and how they are, in some hands, used to spiritually abuse people and justify certain things or certain belief systems that may not be particularly ethical. So I think what you've said there is quite prevalent in terms of this is not an interview for us to just say Mormonism is bad, and the show isn't a show that is here to say that all religion is bad. There are lots of things that exist for people that live inside the Mormon community that are experiencing positive well-being and community and love. And there are loads of resources and community groups for people to access that are having those positive experiences. And then there are platforms like this podcast and your blog that are there for people who are not having positive experiences to be validated and to know that they have a place where they can speak out about these people that are using those religious texts in a way that is not ethical or appropriate. Some of the things that you mentioned in that last section that I thought was interesting to draw on is how you were offered quite early on certain positions within the Mormon Church. Do you feel like this is quite typical, or do you feel like perhaps it's because you were such an outwardly dedicated member of the church quickly that you were taking the text on board and the practices and attending services? Or is it because you were in Ontario, where it's kind of like a lesser Mormon-based area of the world where there aren't many people to fill those positions within the church? Do you kind of have an inkling of why that might be, that you were offered all of these positions so early on?
I don't think that it was unusual that I was offered a position early on. I think that the position that they chose for me was different, but they do like to right away. One of the things that they like for new members very quickly is to get them a calling as quickly as possible, to get them actively engaged with the church. Okay. and doing something. And they see it as a fostering a community kind of thing, but it's also kind of making it harder to leave, making it so that it's noticed that you're not there kind of thing.
Right. And how does it feel to be offered a clergy position? Does that make you kind of feel, would you say, sort of like in the love bomb stages of a high demand religious group? Or was it kind of like something you knew was typical for the Mormon Church and you were kind of like, cool, okay, so I'm like here with some title and responsibility?
Yeah, I'd say that. I mean, it caught me a little off guard because I wasn't expecting it. Right. So I was a little bit like scared at first because I didn't really know fully what I was agreeing to, what it would entail, and I got even more worried when I found out what it would entail, because I was, as I mentioned before, really not that great with money. But it actually did kind of help me to learn about like budgeting and whatnot, and so it did help me a little bit in that aspect. But yeah, it definitely it does. You know, when you get ordained to the priesthood, and that feels good, right? When you get given a calling, especially if it's a calling of importance, that feels good. That makes you feel, you know, especially when I started out, I didn't really have that great of a self-esteem kind of thing. But yeah, it definitely does kind of help to make a person feel like they're important and that sort of thing.
And it's very, as you said, you know, these practices have been changing and adapting and growing for 200 years to the point where they are a fine art at this point. So it's very systematic, by your experience at least, the way individuals are funneled into the church through various rituals and ceremonies and titles. It's not just sort of you attend church, or you attend temple, or you attend Kingdom Hall, or whatever word it is for whichever movement you're affiliated with, and you're now a member. There's a very systematic funneling that individuals are expected to go through before they are classed as full members of the church, or at least able to fully access the temple.
Yeah, and the further you go to, right, like the further, one thing that was really impressed on me is that, you know, once you've been through the endowment, you're more accountable now, right? So you better really make sure that you're ready for it, because, you know, with great power comes great responsibility kind of idea, except that it's not really great power. It's just with, yeah, the further in you get, the more, the worse your standing is spiritually when you leave, because now you're accountable. Now you know all of these things, and you can't plead "I didn't know" anymore, right? So, yeah. So yeah.
Do you feel like this funneling that creates almost like a hierarchy, do you feel it makes the Mormon faith more desirable for people to become more and more and more involved, because you know that these different levels exist, and you know that there are different rewards that you may be able to access if you go through these stages? Do you think it makes it more desirable, or maybe like a fear of missing out, FOMO kind of aspect?
Oh yeah, very, very much. I mean, the end game of Mormonism that they teach, although they are kind of trying to walk this back a little bit now, I think. But when I was involved in the church, the end game was you can actually become like God. God was once a mortal person like we were, and through obedience to his God, and through these rituals and ordinances, he became God, and you can do the same thing. And that is very much the goal. That's why they want to seal you to your family. They say that that's why they want to seal you to your family. They want to seal you to your family because, again, this is my opinion here, but because if you make someone's salvation pinned upon their sealing to their family, and one of their family members step out of line, now all of a sudden it's harming your eternal salvation, and it creates that whole, what are you doing? You can't leave the church. What are you doing to our eternal family kind of thing? So it creates that pressure for people to not want their family members to leave the church, because it now all of a sudden it also negatively impacts them and their spiritual standing.
And I'm sure this is something that played a huge part into your journey out of the Mormon church, which I'm kind of eager to discuss at length as the main subject and bulk of this episode. And I know that deconstruction is something that you feel quite passionately about as well. So we'll make sure that we dedicate a large segment of this episode to that particular subject. But before we get to that point, we need to talk about the rest of your journey in the Mormon faith, and then your journey out of the church. So how did your life change once you'd been through your endowment ceremony, once you had full access to the temple, once you became, almost, I should say, because there were some things that you didn't go through, once you became a member of the Mormon church, or the LDS church, or however people would prefer me to label the group? What actually happened to you and your faith commitments at this point? Did things change significantly?
I guess I don't know that they changed all that much, other than now I feel like I've got this secret. You know, I have all the I have the signs and tokens that I need to get into heaven. So maybe like a little bit of arrogance came along with that, as much as I hate to think that, but it definitely did make it so that I was much more it made me much more motivated to stay in line, because I wanted, I'd taken this step. I knew that there were supposedly consequences for then walking away. So I wanted at this point to be sure that I want to make sure that I'm doing everything exactly right. So it made me a lot more obedient, really, I guess would be the best way to describe it.
So definitely no coffee at this point.
Oh no coffee from the time they told me not to. In fact,
Wow.
when I decided that I was going to keep the word of wisdom like they told me, I had just bought a big box of green tea, which was a big no-no. And so I just gave it to my brother. I said, I can't have this. The religion that I'm joining, they don't want me to have this. And he said, well, you should join a new religion every day. I get free stuff out of the deal.
Yeah, got your best interests obviously in his sights.
Yeah.
So do your commitments to the church change at this point in terms of your tithing, your time committed to the church and church related activities?
Not directly. I'm still paying the same amount of tithing, but I mean, it is a little bit more of a financial burden because now I'm going to the church, and I decided I wanted to. You can rent temple clothing for the ordinances, but I decided that I wanted to go often enough that it would be more economical to just purchase the temple clothing instead. So somewhere, I don't know where it is, but somewhere I have a bag full of the temple clothing that's super secret that no
Wow.
one's supposed to see, but I don't know what happened to it.
What does it look like? Spill the
Um,
beans.
yeah, so you start out at the beginning of the ceremony, you're wearing everything is white. They're like white slacks, white dress shirt, white tie, white socks, white slippers. And then they send you in with a temple packet that has the other clothing that gets put on throughout the ceremony. And there's like put the robe on the left shoulder, on the right shoulder, that sort of thing. But there's also, by the time you leave, there's like a robe that goes over the one shoulder. There's a sash that ties on it. There's a weird hat that looks kind of like a baker's hat with a little string that ties to the epaulette on the robe. And there is a green apron that's supposed to represent the apron of fig leaves that Adam and Eve made in the Garden
Oh
of
my
Eden.
goodness. So
And there's supposed to be all the symbolism around it. There are like these 12 little pleats on the one shoulder that are supposed to represent the 12 tribes of Israel and whatnot. And there's markings on the temple garments that they go over what the markings on the garments mean, that you're supposed to remember. There's supposed to be reminders, but yeah, there's a lot of like supposedly symbolism in the clothing. A lot of it apparently is derived from Masonic rituals and symbolism, but I didn't know that at the time.
that's so interesting to kind of think there's not only this systematic funneling into kind of full access to the temple, but then there's also these systematic rituals taking place inside services where you're expected to understand in a very regimented way exactly how these different garments are worn and what they symbolize. And there's so many instructions you must be juggling in your head all of the time on how things are done. And of course, that's probably a very purposeful thing. Through yourself in this at 100% as well, so you're probably juggling a load of different things at the same time because you're learning so actively about the Mormon faith as you go through.
Yeah, there was a few years back, and I remember I was still an active Mormon at the time. Have you heard of the TV series Big Love? It's a show that's about like a group of like fundamentalist Mormons. He was in the LDS Church, but he decided that he wanted to but he also had ties to one of these fundamentalist groups. It was a fictional offshoot, but
Okay.
there was this one episode that they did a number of years back that caused massive uproar among the Mormon community, and the leaders were very much trying to be like, no, don't boycott it. It will only draw attention to it. But there was an episode where they actually showed like the tiniest part of the endowment ceremony as part of the episode with like the full temple regalia, and people were just losing their minds about this.
Do you think that if you were to Google it, you'd be able to find pictures? surely
Yes,
there's.
I definitely could.
Oh wow, yeah. So, oh, I see the green pouches. Yeah. Wow. Would you say that that's what it looked like this one
Yeah,
here?
that's exactly it.
Oh my
Yeah,
goodness.
and
Yeah. So,
that thing with the thing that they have with their hand, their arm across their
mhm.
throat like that. That's part of the ceremony that was removed. They've been removing a lot of stuff in it. It's stuff that I didn't experience, but I learned it used to be a thing. There used to be a part in the temple ceremony where you had to pantomime slitting your throat and disemboweling yourself as the things that you would do rather than reveal the secrets of the temple.
Is this the disembowelment movement here, this one?
I think so, yeah.
Oh my goodness, that's so interesting. I see what you mean as well about the hat attaching to the.
Yeah, yeah,
I had absolutely no idea that this was part of the ceremonies. This particular clothing.
yeah. And there's still various different like hand gestures and handshakes and whatnot that you're supposed to know and learn and whatnot. And they're supposed to serve as the things that when you get to the gates of heaven, they're supposed to be the signs that you give to the angel to let them know that, hey, I'm a good guy here, let me in. So if they're right, it's okay that I left because I still know all the passwords.
You have some of this clothing somewhere in
Yeah,
where
yeah,
you live.
yeah.
Oh my goodness.
I think it actually might be at my parents' place. But if so, I'll probably never see it again because lots of stuff is there that I just
Right.
don't wear.
Okay. So how long was it? You joined at 27, or you became involved at 27, I should
Yeah.
say. How long was it before things started to change and you realized that maybe the Mormon faith wasn't the right religious movement for you to be associated with?
It happened kind of gradually. It's kind of hard to pinpoint an exact time. I spent a lot of time going out because I was 27. I was too old to actually serve a formal mission. So I went out with our local missionaries and talked with them a lot because that was kind of the next best thing that I could do. If you're a male and you don't serve a mission, that is another thing that kind of makes you lesser than. Makes it very difficult to find a mate within the church because they really, really impress on the women. You want to marry a return missionary. You want them to have those experiences that you can share with your children. So I started getting my first kind of inkling that maybe something was up when I was out teaching with the missionaries. And we were teaching a guy. He was from another religious faith. I think he might have been a Sikh. I don't remember exactly. It doesn't really matter. But I was bearing my testimony to him of how I had had these experiences that I knew that the church was true. And then he turned around and he told me of these experiences that he'd had where God had confirmed to him that his faith was true. And it was very similar sounding. And that kind of got me a little bit. I'm like, I don't know what to do with that because I know what my experience was. I have no way of objectively comparing it to the experience that he had. So what do I do with that? And so afterwards, I talked with the missionaries and I took it to like my bishop and a couple of other close trusted friends. And I'm like, what do I do about this? Because like this experience that I had is like the thing that is the foundation that everything else is built on top of. And if someone else had a similar confirmation that their very different faith is, they can't both be the one true church.
Mm-hmm.
And the answer that I got back was something along the lines of, well, what you need to understand is that there's the gift of the Holy Ghost and there's the light of Christ. The gift of the Holy Ghost only is given to members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints once they are confirmed and receive the gift of the Holy Ghost. Everyone has the light of Christ, so they have the ability to have those experiences, to have things to testify to them of things that are true, but it's not the full It's not the full gift of the Holy Ghost. So while he may have had an experience, it wasn't the same as yours. And I didn't like that answer because it felt very kind of dismissive and a little bit conceited, but it was enough that I could put it on the shelf. One of the things that they'll tell you when you have a doubt or whatnot is that, oh, just put that on the shelf. It's not eternal. It's not essential to your salvation. So don't focus too much on it. We'll have answers to those questions we'll have answers to those questions eventually. But for now, just focus on the things that are essential and save that for a later time. And that's why when people leave the church, they often refer to it as their shelf breaking because of the weight of all of the things that were on this metaphorical shelf that it finally comes crashing down. But and there were a bunch of little things like that. One of the points where it started becoming kind of a major turning point was after I got married. My wife was not a member of the church when we met. I had no intentions of forcing it on her. I would answer questions, I would tell her about it, but I was very, very adamant about, if you join this church, I want it to be because you actually believe, not because you think that that's what I want for you, because I didn't see that that would be a sincere thing anyway, and it wouldn't really do anything. And I mean, even though I was theoretically depriving myself of having an eternal companion, my thinking at the time was that, you know what, if I can't be with her for time and all eternity, if I can only have time and not eternity, that's better than nothing at all. So I'll take what I can get, kind of deal. But she did end up joining the church because I unconsciously applied the same kind of psychological tactics on her, and I have all kinds of stuff that I have to work through about that whole ordeal. But so she did end up joining the church, but we couldn't be sealed because she hadn't been a member for a year yet when we got married. So she couldn't get her endowment, so we couldn't be sealed. So we had to have a civil ceremony, and we did that. But she ended up having some problems with the church. She hadn't done the research that I had done. She hadn't found the solutions that I had found. And she started having a lot of questions. And I started looking at those questions to try to help her find her way through. And I just ended up finding more and more questions than I was finding answers as I really, really started digging into this stuff. And also she was having some trouble coping with the demands that we had been given a calling to serve in primary as basically unqualified daycare providers for the children whose parents were in their meetings. And one of the kids that we actually, I love the kids that we watched, don't get me wrong. One of the kids that we watched, though, was on the autism spectrum, and we had no training whatsoever for how to deal with that. And she was really, really having trouble and I was having trouble dealing with it. She was having particularly a hard time dealing with that. And I was having a hard time understanding, why is it that God's plan of happiness is causing so much stress and problems for my wife? Like this doesn't compute. And so I was starting to ask questions, and part of the reason that I don't have a problem giving my name, like I've used my first and last names here, is because when I started asking questions, I started from the assumption that the church was true, and I wanted to find answers. So I went to Reddit, and the username that I have been using everywhere is J-Lamut, my first initial and last name, and I figured I want answers. I'm not looking to destroy the church. I just want answers to questions, and I have no need to hide my name for that. There's nothing wrong with that. So I went to the LDS subreddit, one of the faithful LDS forums. There are two of them, and I went to the ex-Mormon subreddit, and I said, I have questions about the church. Here are my questions. Please help me to understand them. I want to get both sides of the story. Go. And I actually had to ask permission on the LDS Reddit, the subreddit, because they're very controlling about what they allow people to post, and they're very kind of ban happy. If they feel that someone is talking negatively about the church, they'll just remove you. And they said,
information control you can do to that right? level. That's interesting, isn't it?
And one of the things someone in the ex-Mormon subreddit said, let me ask you something. Which is the forum that you had to worry about consequences for asking your questions in? I'm like, okay, that's a good point. And then on the Faithful subreddit, they're like, okay, so we have this like super secret group, but you need to create like a name that's not your name. You need to create like an anonymous throwaway account. You can go in there, you can ask questions, and they'll answer them for you. And I'm like, okay, this is great. I don't know why all the cloak and dagger, why I need to like conceal my identity or whatever, but I did that. And they like tried to answer my questions, and I was going and I was asking my questions on both sides. And then there was this Vice documentary that hit. And I found out about the way that the church handles reports of sexual abuse. And it's horrific.
Not just reports of sexual abuse, but historical reports as well of sexual abuse.
Yeah.
Some that are outside the statute of limitations in some parts of America as well.
Yeah.
Wild.
And I'm told that this has changed, but the way that it worked at the time was that when there's a report of sexual abuse that gets reported to the bishop, the first thing the bishop is supposed to do is to call this hotline. It's a church hotline, and it puts them through to the church's legal department. They're not supposed to talk to the cops. They're supposed to talk to this hotline, talk to the legal team, get direction about where to go from there. If they deem that this particular case could do harm to the church, then they get the legal team going to try to sweep it under the rug as fast as they possibly can. It's not about protecting the victim. I have actually talked to someone in the past. She didn't want me, well, she didn't tell me her name, and she blacked it out, but she actually sent me a copy of a letter that the church sent to her in kind of flowery language, but basically saying, if you don't shut up about this, it's going to cost you your salvation, was the long and the short of it. Like I've seen this firsthand, what they will do if they want to shut you up. And that was the point where I'm like, I can't defend this anymore. When I allowed myself to look at the material that was supporting the church as critically as I was looking at the stuff that worked against it, when I allowed myself to like step away from the conclusion that the church must be true, and I allowed myself to look at both sides equally, I'm like, I can't defend this. This is what they're doing is wrong. I can't support this. And then everything comes falling apart, because when you realize when I came to realize how wrong I could be about something, how swayed I could be by propaganda to such an extent for so long, it puts you in a position where when you finally realize it, you're like, now I have to take a step back and I have to reevaluate everything that I have ever believed. Because if I could be that wrong about this, what else am I wrong about? And
wow,
it's been 2 years since that time, and I'm definitely in a better place than I was at that point, but I still have to deal with that. And I've just had to kind of console myself with with taking the stance that, you know what, I'm just gonna take the information that I have, be willing to accept new information, be willing to look at everything that I possibly can, do the best that I can, and understand that I'm probably still wrong about stuff. I'm probably going to continue to be wrong about stuff, but that's okay, as long as when I realize that I'm wrong, I change direction and I go, okay, this is now based on what I know, I'm doing the best that I can with the knowledge that I have. And along with that comes that whole, like, they have this line that they like to trot out, even the very elect shall be deceived. And so I had to struggle a lot with, like, is this really what it looks like it is? Or am I being deceived by Satan because he wants to trick me out of my salvation? And I spent a long time struggling with that. But then when I actually, again, objectively look at all the evidence, I'm like, oh, okay, there's this whole garbage pile over here that I can't just ignore. Um, but yeah, it really messes with you, and it makes it very, very hard when you've been through that to really ever be able to fully trust your own judgment again, I think.
And when you said before about people using the shelf breaking analogy, it kind of really hits home from what you've just said about your experiences, having this profound moment where you're not sure what
Yeah,
your belief system is, not just in terms of the Mormon faith, but your
yeah,
entire life before, during, and after the LDS Church. And
yeah. 41
you're,
actually.
I suppose into your 30s at this point. So you've got an extensive amount of life lived prior to this moment where you're trying to recognize or come to
Mhm.
terms with what it is that you actually believe in. I don't this is where it's really difficult to ask the this is where it's difficult to ask the questions to get the information, because I don't even know where to start in terms of where did you start?
I started by having random kind of panic attacks. I guess is where I started. Um, and after that, I guess after that subsided, it just came to be like, I mean, at some point, I just had to kind of a switch had to flip, and I had to be like, I just have to learn to be okay with not having all the answers. Keep looking, but I had to eventually I had to just come to a point where I accepted that I can be wrong about stuff, and that's okay as long as I'm willing to correct myself when I find out that that's the case.
I feel it's very important to reflect on what you said before about how you are just taking things as they come and understanding that where you may have been wrong or where you may have made mistakes, you're correcting yourself as you have those revelations or moments, which is so important. That level of kindness that you are allowing yourself to have for yourself in those moments is so incredibly important for people's deconstruction and recovery, because you haven't done anything wrong. Human nature is to trust people from a evolutionary standpoint. We are, from hunter-gatherer stages where people had to rely on other people to exist, to survive. It's so important, and that is built into our chemistry. So for you to not question what you're being told, or for you to believe in what's being presented to you and not second guess or question or doubt or think that there is anything untoward going on, is just human nature. So the fact that you're allowing yourself to kind of just go through these motions as and when you experience them, I feel is something that other listeners who may be experiencing something similar could really adopt for themselves to help them in their own journeys through deconstruction and recovery. And after you managed to do online research and you found a way to overcome the panic attacks and the ill mental health that you were experiencing through your falling out of the Mormon faith, or your snapping, or your flipping the switch, was it just your continuing of research and reading and learning about things, much in the way that you did when you joined the Mormon Church? You know, you threw yourself into learning about it, reading the Book of Mormon, understanding the movement backwards and forwards in the way that it was presented to you, with maybe half of the information, as we know about the way that Joseph Smith is presented in the Mormon faith from other episodes that we've done on the show, which is maybe not entirely accurate, or there is a lot missing out, which
to say the
would
least.
favor the Mormon Church and the storyline that they would like people to buy into 100%. Was it just a learning journey where you threw yourself into kind of deconstructing the Mormon faith in a different way with all of this extra information that you now had access to? What did that journey look like in kind of learning about everything? Because you've sent me so many sources and so much information of stuff that you've learned since leaving the Mormon faith. And I'm really interested in that part of your journey out of Mormonism.
I mean, at first, I just wanted to quietly leave. I didn't want to make a big scene of it. I just wanted to quietly move on. For my wife, it was very important that she wanted to formally resign. And I decided that in solidarity, I would do that with her. So there's a service called Quit Mormon, which was the thing that I first talked to you about when we first talked. They provide free legal counsel to people who want to leave the Mormon Church, I quit through them, which tells you something about an organization when the easiest way to leave involves a lawyer and a notary public. But I wanted to more or less not make a lot of waves because I had a lot of friends within the LDS Church. So I just wanted to just quietly learn as much as I could, because I wanted to be sure that I was making the right choice, because at the very beginning I still had some hesitations about it. And I would have probably never ever said anything about it until because I left in 2019, until the whole George Floyd thing happened. Because it started bringing up a lot of attention toward racism, and I didn't really understand how serious a problem it still was. I knew that racism had historically been a thing, but I was like, yeah, that's a thing that was in the past, and there's still the odd person here and there who's racist and whatever. I didn't know, and I really, when I learned about what the situation really was, I really wanted to support that, but I really didn't feel comfortable being outspoken about the whole Black Lives Matter movement, having this thing in my past, having been part of this church that had some, and we haven't even talked about this, but the church has historically had some very, very racist doctrines, not even policies, but doctrines. And so many times people are like, oh, that's when somebody gets upset about something, like, oh, that's a policy, not a doctrine. No, this was doctrine. Black people were banned from having the priesthood, and it was taught from the time of Brigham Young up until 1978 that Black people were lesser than, could not receive the priesthood, could not go to the temple, could not be sealed to their spouses, etc. And I felt very, very uncomfortable supporting the Black Lives Matter movement without addressing that aspect of my past and saying, hey, look, I was a part of this thing, and it was bad and it was wrong, and at that point the floodgates were open, and that's when I really started. I really started actually giving myself to be more vocal about the church and being more kind of engaged. I mean, I had been active kind of in the Exmo subreddit, whatever, because whatever, it's Reddit and whatnot. And if you look at my account there, you'll see a lot of kind of snark toward the church and whatnot. So maybe if you're a believing member who's watching this episode for whatever reason, don't look into my Reddit history. You're going to get offended. I'm sorry, but I needed a place to. Exmo Reddit is great because when people leave the church, they need a place to vent, and it's a great place for that because there are a lot of other people in the same boat. And I was very much in that boat, and I still am from time to time. I still just need to like get stuff off my chest because I keep learning new things and being like, just when I think I've gotten to the bottom of this pile of crap, there's more stuff under. It's just turtles all the way down.
Absolutely. And it's exactly what Janice Selby said in our interview around religious trauma. People have a lot of emotions. They have grief, they have anger, they have shame, they have embarrassment, they have guilt, and they need somewhere for all of that stuff to go. And if it is internalized, it will make you externally sick and unwell. So it might not be for everybody, but places and forums, such as yours, or your blog, and Reddit for some people, could be a place where all of those emotions get spilled out. You did have a life partner at this point as well, who you could have all of these conversations and explore these thoughts with as well. And it would be really interesting to gain her perspective, because I imagine meeting somebody and falling in love with somebody who is a very committed member of the LDS Church, who had been through these various rituals and through this funneling process into becoming a recommended, fully accessing the temple Mormon guy, for her to then join and perhaps be kind of like, what, I don't know what the word would be, but like sucked up into the level of church commitment that you're already at, without that slow kind of funneling into it, for her to kind of just be like, and you're like, hey, come to the church with me or the temple with me on this day and this day and this day for this amount of time.
Actually, she invited herself.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, I wasn't going to push it on her in any way. She's like, hey, can I come to church with you? And I'm like, yeah, you can come to church with me. Of course you can come to church. But yeah, she's a much more private person though. So I mean, while I would love for her to share her story, I don't know if she would feel comfortable with that.
Of course, yeah. And we can't speak to how she was thinking or feeling at that time. That was just a thought I had. It would be interesting to know, because I'm sure other people have had these experiences as well, where they've met somebody that's not in the Mormon church, and there's been a discussion and agreement for that person to join or convert, and perhaps they are not able to fully accept the faith in the way that you were, and they may have their questions because they haven't had these experiences of confirmation bias and huge, profound moments in their lives which have really cemented their stance on particular religious groups in the way that you had that experience with the Book of Mormon. And for somebody who's been involved with the church for a number of years, understands the movement inside out from the way that the Mormon church presents itself, I imagine it must be, for people getting into relationships with people who may have been where you were, it might be quite different or difficult for them to accept it in the way you did. And even though that might not have been the experience for your wife, I imagine there's a few people out there that have had those experiences where they're like, whoa, as you said, the high demands, struggling to kind of really adapt to the high demands of the religious group. And I imagine that that's the same for a lot of people, very overwhelming, very much like, oh my goodness, I didn't realize this was the extent, or this was what was expected of me, or these were the consequences that I would then have thrown onto me if I was to ever reject the Holy Ghost or spill innocent blood. So it would be, I imagine there's people listening that are like, I could speak to that. So get in touch if that's the case. But you've spoken briefly there about some historical rhetoric and doctrine in the Mormon church around Black, Indigenous, and people of color viewpoints that the Mormon church had at some point. And even though those pieces of doctrine may not be included in temple services anymore, that it's not necessarily the case that those are not viewpoints of the Mormon church, in the same way that certain actions and things have been taken out of the temple ceremonies in the way you described, with kind of like the slitting of the throat movements being removed, but I'm sure that they still allude to that in some passages and parts of LDS doctrine. So we know from certain people in positions of power and leadership within the Mormon Church recently come in to stand and do public speeches around the Black community and how actually they should, I say this is really even uncomfortable for me to repeat, things around how the Black community should be thankful for the Mormon Church for allowing them to be able to take part in all of the ceremonies and rituals that other ethnicities can take part in. So uncomfortable. I can't remember the person's name. Do you
Brad
remember
Wilcox.
what his name is?
Yeah.
So this guy stands up at a service and basically just says some of the most racist stuff that I've ever heard in my life, very publicly, and it all came out all over the internet, in spaces of kind of cult spaces, religious spaces. I'm sure they spoke about it quite extensively on the ex-Mormon subreddit.
Yep. Can I make a prediction? He's going to get called to serve as a mission president. That's what they do when a person in a position of authority, when they want to move them out of the spotlight without making it look like they're punishing him, because nobody really talks to mission presidents, but it's a prestigious position within the church. So that's what they do with people that they want to shut up without making it look like they're actually punishing him. But yeah.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So even though, and I'm not saying that this is universal across the Mormon faith, I'm just saying that there have been some recent public expressions by people in positions of power that may suggest that racist rhetoric that was once a part of and intrinsic to the Mormon faith hasn't actually really entirely dissipated or disappeared, even though those pieces of doctrine may not be used in services anymore. And people that are in the Black, Indigenous, or people of color community groups can take part in those things that historically, like sealing ceremonies and stuff, as you've spoken about, historically, they were not allowed to participate in or be invited to. It's just so uncomfortable for me to even, and that kind of leads me into the question around talking about the LGBTQIA plus community and how they are, of course, segregated or seen as second-class citizens within high-demand religious groups a lot of the time. And if you have encountered any of these particular situations personally where you knew people, or you can speak to how that particular community group may be viewed or treated within the LDS Church.
That one is one that has been kind of close to me. Because my brother is gay, and every single time that I would go for a temple recommend, now obviously the church is very, very, very against gay marriage. They've pushed legislation, or tried to push legislation, and it had some measure of success from time to time in trying to make it illegal. Every time I've had a temple recommend interview, there was one question that would be asked of me that I always felt it was very, very necessary to clarify because of my brother. The question, which has been changed, but the question that I was asked many times, and I have it up here, reads as follows. Do you support, affiliate with, or agree with any group or individual whose teachings or practices are contrary to or oppose those accepted by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints? Every time I was asked that question, I always had to clarify with the person who was interviewing me and say, look, my brother is gay. If you're asking me to cut him out of my life, I'm sorry, that's not going to happen. If you're okay with that, great, we can move on, but that's not something that I'm willing to do. And I was fortunate enough to always have been interviewed by someone who was able to kind of interpret the teachings and the doctrines in a way that they could make it okay for that to be a thing. But that was always a thing that was, I guess, a little bit of a shelf item for me, something that I felt was very, very, very important. And again, since the church doesn't recognize gay marriage, you can't be sealed to your spouse. If you're gay, you'll be punished for even getting civilly married. In fact, for a while there, your children would even be punished. They've kind of flip-flopped back and forth on that a little bit. But so yeah, if you're a person who's gay, your options are basically you can choose to never get married, never be sealed, and to never qualify for the highest degree of the celestial kingdom, or you can fake it till you make it and have a straight marriage that's like on paper only and whatnot. And they actually did. They actually did. That was the route that they encouraged people to take back in the day. They've kind of stepped back from that, but there is still the odd person who goes that route, and it's just mind-boggling to think, like, again, being a straight white cis male, these are things that I've never personally had to address head on. I had the luxury of being able to not really think very hardly about them while I was in the church. But I mean, looking back on it, it's just like I can't even imagine what it must feel like to be a person who's not straight, who has a different gender identity or sexual preference or whatever, and to be within a framework of the Mormon Church, even if, like, especially if you're somewhere like in Utah where your whole family is Mormon, and going against the grain is going to have severe repercussions for you, right? Like I was fortunate enough in that, being a convert, I had friends and family outside of the church. I had a support network outside of the church. I wouldn't have been able to survive, right? But to have the added I don't want to say challenge, because it shouldn't be a challenge, although it is, just because of the way that everything is set up. I'm rambling a bit here, but like
no, you're not, and I'm exactly there with you as well. It comes back again to those insular communities. If you're somebody that's second or third generation, you're born in, where's your support network outside of the Mormon faith, outside of your family? How do you access further education if you don't have the financial support or family support? How do you even go about accessing a secular or worldly life or relationships or hobbies or anything outside of the church if your entire community is Mormon based, not just spiritually, but physically?
Mm-hmm.
Your neighbors, your entire neighborhood, your education system, whether it's homeschooling or public school that's just, heavily linked to the LDS community. So everybody is kind of following the same rule book. It's almost impossible. It's like living on another planet almost.
Yeah.
Where would you even start?
It's so crazy because I couldn't even see it until I actually allowed myself to see it. And mm-hmm. Now that I look back on it, I'm like, oh my God, like what I can't believe I supported this. I can't believe that I defended this. And it just, that's a whole nother ball of trauma to.
And that's the heartbreaking thing, I suppose, is to think about all of those people that are in these high demand religious groups that are living half lives or lives that are not true to themselves. They're in relationships with people that they're not emotionally or physically attracted to. They're living lives that are not fruitful for them, that are not engaging, that are not inspiring, and that's so heartbreaking to think about, especially as you said, that the people that exist in those insular communities that really can't see a way out of that situation.
I still follow the LDS subreddit, the faithful subreddit, and every couple of weeks to a month, someone comes in and says, hey everyone, I'm a person who's struggling with same-sex attraction, and then they just like bleed their guts out to everyone about like how hard it is and what do I do about this, and I just want to message them and be like, get out of the Mormon church, they're killing you. And I just don't do that because I that's not what they want to hear from me. And it's just, I see it all the time. It's not like a one-off thing, right? It happens. And these are just the people who are willing to actually go into the community and say, hey, I'm struggling with this. I'm sure for every one person who does that, there's like 100 others who like just doesn't even want to open their mouth, right? And it just
go straight to leadership, and who knows how that may be received. Who knows how that may be received by leadership if that is the person's first port of call. Because of course, if you are having doubts or struggles, then you are encouraged a lot of the time in these high demand religious groups to go to leadership to express your doubts or your worries. Of course, there's the chance if you open up to family members that there may be serious repercussions around that as well, because sometimes family members may be inclined to go to leadership, and then there's a whole thing around going to meetings with elders in the Jehovah's Witnesses, for example. And of course, people may never speak out about it and may wonder why they have these sinful and lustful and inappropriate thoughts and feelings towards same-sex attraction, or about their own bodies, about how they identify with their gender, their sexuality, things that they are attracted to. May never speak out to anybody about those things, but wonder why, if they feel like they're following the Mormon faith in the way that they've been taught to, in a correct way, why is this happening to them, and why can't they be a good, faithful Mormon? Because they have these thoughts and feelings, which of course they can't control, and that in itself is where a lot of the spiritual abuse comes in, and where a lot of the doctrine that is still used in these high demand religious groups is extremely problematic. But that is another lengthy conversation for for another day. So there are a few points left on my sheet to talk about before we finish. Some of the stuff we've covered. So I'm guessing that the term magical underwear, is that the white briefs that I've seen in those pictures?
Yeah, they're the ones. That's the underwear, the ones that I had to purchase without ever seeing. A lot of Mormons consider that to be an offensive term. The correct term is temple garment. I have heard them, if you really want to use the term that's going to make someone happy, call them Jesus jammies. I don't recommend saying that to a Mormon. They're going to get really upset, but I have heard that term used.
And then there's the term soaking as well, which I really wanted to cover in my last episode on the LDS Church, but didn't get an opportunity to. So, of course, with the doctrine and rhetoric around the Black, Indigenous and people of color community groups, as well as the LGBTQIA plus community groups, there is the misogyny and the purity culture that comes with this particular high demand religious group as well. We've covered this a lot in other Christian faith-based movements, but it seems that some faithful and devout Mormons have found a way around no sex before marriage, and that phenomenon is this thing called soaking. So I just wondered if you could talk the listeners through exactly what that is, and apparently is all the rage in like Brigham Young University dormitories and things like that.
So I've heard. So when I first encountered the term, and someone explained to me what it was, I was sure that this was more anti-Mormon propaganda, whatever. But yeah, apparently there are some people who think that they found a loophole around the law of chastity, where with this soaking thing, where how do I say this without upping the rating on your basically the male inserts himself and then doesn't move, and that's it. And because apparently God is a velociraptor whose vision is based on motion and he can't see you if you're not moving, I guess. I don't know. But there are people out there who think that that's a thing and that that's a loophole around the law of chastity and that you don't need to report that to your bishop and it's all fine and good. So you do you, I guess.
So,
right? But
there's so many things with this soaking thing that are worrisome because, first of all, there is often a lack of sex and relationship education that comes with high demand religious groups that have such strict policies and doctrine around sex before marriage and purity culture. So, of course, there's sexual health and pregnancy to consider, but also the whole point of this soaking is that the penis is inserted into the vagina. Intercourse suggests that there is some type of motion or thrusting. So by sitting still or lying still inside the vagina and not moving, but still ejaculating, causing the soaking of the penis, I just don't understand what the point is of going through that process or using that loophole. If, I mean, it's just for male gratification, so it's still misogynist in that way.
Yeah.
There's what pleasure can there be for the the other participant if there's no motion involved and no stimulus for the other person that's probably not soaking.
That the only I tried to do a little bit of research to try to figure out where this came from. And the only theory that I was able to come up with was there was a guy back in the 1800s, Albert Carrington, who was kind of a higher up in the church, and he was excommunicated for having some extramarital affairs, shall we say. And I'm just looking at his Wikipedia article here. When it talks about his, and I suspect it maybe has something to do with this. Somehow, this story somehow got kind of taken and telephone gamed over the years. But on his Wikipedia article under excommunication and readmission, it says Carrington was excommunicated from the LDS Church by the Quorum of the 12 Apostles on November 7th, 1885, for adultery, fornication, and lewd and lascivious conduct. Carrington's extramarital relationships had begun in England where he was the mission president, and he hid his relationships from the leaders for over 10 years, blah, 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 blah. Carrington argued before the 12 that because he did not ejaculate inside the women he had sexual relations with, he had technically not committed adultery and had simply committed a little folly in Israel. The quorum disagreed and excommunicated him. And maybe something having to do with that story kind of morphed over time and became, but I don't know. That's just theory on my part.
So that was another phrase that's come up in some of my research around the Mormon Church. But there's a few other pieces of information that you sent me that was interesting and actually was mentioned in my last episode around the Mormon Church. So Molly Mormon is a term for somebody that is a kind of do-gooder female devout Mormon, but there's a male equivalent to that term as well.
A Molly Mormon is someone who's like following all the rules and doing everything proper and exactly, like not deviating from the teachings whatsoever. The male equivalent to that is Peter priesthood.
So would you say that you were a Peter priesthood?
I would say I guess I strive to be. There's a little bit of a pejorative kind of it's kind of got the connotation of goody two shoes. But yeah, I would say I definitely did strive to be as close to the teachings as I could, because again, I took those oaths that I made in the temple very seriously. As an example of that, one of the oaths that I made was that I would wear the temple garment day and night for the rest of my life. About a week after I received my endowments, I had an asthma attack, and it took me a couple of days to recover. Now, there are different styles of the temple garments. Normally there's one that has kind of like a scooped neck that goes really low, but I got the crew neck ones because I figured they looked a little bit more normal looking. But just the weight of the collar on my neck, just that slight little pressure was making it harder for me to breathe. But because I took that oath that I had sworn so seriously, I refused to take off my temple garment. I'm just like, I'll just deal with it and I'll recover, because I'm being tested. This is, I made this thing. I was told Satan would try to get me to break my covenant. See, there it's happening. I'm not going to let it happen. So I kept wearing it, even though it actually made it hard to breathe. So yeah, I tried to keep the rules as much as I could.
Something else that you mentioned in your emails to me, our kind of conversations back and forth before this meeting, was that there are some other branches of the LDS Church that are starting to crop up here and there as well. And you sent me a YouTube channel called Mormonism Discussion Inc. So what can you tell us about these other branches of Mormonism that are starting to pop up?
So yeah, there is Mormon Discussions. They're kind of a family of podcasts. But they did one episode of Mormonism Live, where they did an interview with this guy Denver Snuffer, who's created this kind of like break off sect from the. I don't know a whole lot about him. It's something I've wanted to learn a little bit more. He would probably take great issue with my saying he's created a break-off sect because he doesn't want to consider himself a leader. He doesn't want, his followers don't want to consider themselves a group or followers or leader or follower, that sort of thing. His big thing is about like personal revelation and this and that. But he basically had some views that were very unorthodox. That he came to through his own research. Also, I just got a warning that my batteries on my headset are dying, so I put one over there, and I'll switch it out if this one dies. But anyway, he had these views that kind of ran contrary to the mainstream Mormon Church, and he wrote a bunch of books. And that's the one thing that you don't want to do. You can have ideas and whatnot that run contrary to the Mormon doctrine, but the minute you start sharing them and the leadership gets wind that you're doing that, he got excommunicated for that pretty quickly. But he's developed kind of a following and whatnot, and of people who basically just think that the church has gotten too controlling and too. They don't agree with the direction that the church is going, and it's costing them members. People are leaving the church over this, so much so that there was this thing they sent out. Dallin H. Oaks, I think, one of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles, to Boise, Idaho, to this thing that's been dubbed the Boise Rescue, to try to talk to the members there and dissuade them from following this guy, even though they swear up and down that it has nothing to do with Denver Snuffer. It's just about following the prophet and whatnot. But all the stuff that they addressed was stuff that he disagrees with them on. So that's totally what it was. But yeah, there are constantly these kind of like people who will split off from the church and start another sect. And the church is very, very, very controlling about that. So much so that they actually even at one point held a trademark on the word Mormon and would pursue legal action against anyone who tried to use it. I think that was either found to be unenforceable or expired or something like that. But so they don't do it anymore. And Russell M. Nelson doesn't like the word Mormon anymore anyway, because apparently it's a victory for Satan. Despite the previous two presidents of the church who backed the I'm a Mormon ad campaign and piled millions of dollars into that. But, God changes his mind under Russell M. Nelson more often than some people change their socks. So
it feels like, I don't know if this is just a thing that came to me whilst you were talking about this particular group, but like unorthodox viewpoints on things that already exist seem to be the flavor of the month at the moment. It's very in keeping with right-wing extreme evangelism and also QAnon, and also things like Jordan Peterson is now kind of verging on reaching that same point. Everybody's talking about Joe Rogan and cancel culture. And I feel like the more kind of out there and unorthodox and shocking people can be with some of their viewpoints and some of their thinking at the moment is more desirable for a lot of people who are going down these algorithms and rabbit holes on the internet than usual. I don't know if it's like a cycle of discontented people because of the state of everything in the world, the state of government and finance and global warming and everything. It seems to just be like a big amalgamation of things. But just as it was back in the 60s and 70s with Nixon and Vietnam and more recessions. I it's just a thought that came to me around unorthodox and shocking viewpoints. And maybe that's why this group with their views is picking up a bit of traction, because people are like, yeah, do you know what? 200 years of the Book of Mormon. I need something new. I need some fresh perspectives. So maybe turning an idea that exists on its head, much like Joseph Smith did when he found the gold plates, or, however you want to interpret Joseph Smith's journey and story. Maybe that's just the way things are going at the moment. And it'll be interesting to see what actually comes of all of that in the next 5 to 10 years. But I imagine that we have not seen the end of new religious movements, and actually there may be another great awakening in the next few years, because the state of the world is really quite scary. So after that little rambling from me, I guess the next part of our questions is to kind of talk about what advice you might have for others that are going through this really difficult deconstruction process. What other things can you offer from your personal experiences that you have done, aside from kind of research and starting your own platforms? How have they helped? And what can you offer people that could be helpful for them through their own deconstruction and recovery?
I think a big part of it is, number one, you're not crazy. Know that when you try to leave a high demand control group, they will try very, very, very hard to make you think that you are losing your mind. But try, if at all possible, to find other people who have gone before you. If you know someone who's left before, see if you can maybe connect with them, see if, they can help you through the experience. Because it is a very, very lonely experience leaving a high control group, because like in my case, I had basically two groups of people. I had my friends who were in the church who all thought that I was being deceived by Satan because I was leaving the church because they'd been taught to believe that, because I would believe that when I saw people leave. And I had other friends and family and whatnot who'd never been a part of the church, who could not understand why I got involved in the first place. And so finding other people who've lived through that can be very, very helpful, just to get some perspective on, like, these are the pitfalls, these are the things that you got to watch out for. If anyone is listening to this and is going through the same thing, my inbox is open. Reach out to me. If you got no one else to talk to, I'm here. I'm not an expert or anything like that, but I am willing to talk. Um,
I actually would like to just speak to this and say that John is very well informed about a lot of things, Mormon, LDS, and the whole subject. I can speak to that from our various communication.
Yeah, thank you. I guess I still have a little bit of imposter syndrome going on there, because to me, I've been at this for like 2 years now, apparently, but it doesn't feel like that long. But yeah, just, I mean, it goes back to what I said before. Just allow yourself the kindness to be like, you know what, I was wrong about something, and that's okay, because I'm learning. And I'm probably still wrong about stuff, and that's okay, because I'm still learning. And just kind of take it one step at a time, really.
And as we said before, you know, you're allowing yourself that space and that kindness to yourself, you know, not putting too much pressure on yourself to understand the experience you went through, but dealing with parts of it as they come to you. A lot of people that we've spoken to on the show, they talk about needing to understand the experience that they've been through and as quickly as possible. And actually, one of the things we do know from these interviews is that deconstruction and healing doesn't ever end. There's no end point. There's no point where you're ever just like, it's done, I've done it, I've reached the end. It doesn't end. People learn all the time. People realize they're still triggered by things 10, 20, 30 years later. And so it's an ongoing journey. It's an ongoing process. So there's no rush for you to understand it all immediately, for you to say, I'm fixed now overnight, because that, unfortunately, as wonderful and as helpful as that would be for people going through these experiences, that's not entirely possible for the majority of people, especially from those that we've spoken to on the show. So as you've said, you kind of just take it as each thing comes to you. You deal with it when that happens. And I think that is not something that we've heard too many people talk about on the show. And I feel like that could be a really useful piece of information for people that may be going through their own deconstruction journeys of kind of, you know, as Janice Selby puts it, divorcing religion, which I always just think is a really nice way to kind of phrase you're leaving the Mormon faith. Maybe you haven't divorced religion altogether, but a lot of people, I think, after they have these traumatic experiences, that is definitely what they do, and something that they have to do to protect themselves in the future. So there is that. There is ex-Mormon subreddit that might be helpful to some people. As John said, his inbox is open. You can email him. I have John's email address. If you'd like to get in touch with him, you can reach out to me and we can sort that out. There's also going to be a list of things in the episode description, as including John's website, so that you can go and read some of the things that John thinks about, that John writes about. And there is a lengthy list of resources as well, John, that you've been sending over to me. I didn't know if you had any off the top of your head that you just wanted to throw out there for the end of this episode.
Yeah. And another thing on that real quick, if you are linking my website to, all of my contact information is on there too. So my email address is on there.
Perfect. That's great. That's great.
Yeah. So like I mentioned, ex-Mormon Reddit is great for, you know, people who are just kind of first leaving. I have more recently found another forum called Discuss Mormonism. That is a little bit lesser known and a little bit more balanced and a little bit less filled with people who need to vent, essentially, where there are some really, really well researched discussions going on there that are rather interesting from both sides, from the believing perspective and from the unbelieving perspective, which is kind of neat the way they've moderated all of that so that people don't kill each other. And there's also a series of podcasts. You've mentioned to me that you had done some listening to John Dehlin's podcast. I've heard of it. I haven't listened to a lot of his, but there is the Mormon Discussions series of podcasts as well. Radio Free Mormon is one that I found that I really like. The guy Radio Free Mormon, he doesn't like to use his real name because he wants to have some degree of anonymity. But he used to be a Mormon apologist. He used to be one of these people who tries to defend the church until he did enough digging and he's like, wait, hang on. And so now he's kind of flipped over to the other side.
Wow, I bet that's a massive deconstruction journey for him as well, kind of going back through all of that and realizing all of the content that he's put out on a public platform as well is perhaps not entirely what he now believes in.
Yeah, he's the one who actually pointed me to the Discuss Mormonism website too. But I really like his podcast because he does some really, really, really in-depth analysis of not only what's going on with the current leadership, but also like the historical stuff. And he's done some digging into things that the church has tried very, very hard to hide. And it's all very, very well researched. And I found it to be like a tremendous resource for me as I was studying and learning. You know, you talk about how well informed I am. A lot of what I've learned has come from Radio Free Mormon, actually. But there's some additional research on my own too. But those are great resources, and I'm sure there are more that are going to come to mind that I can't even think of off the top of my head. But again, my website, I link stuff that's interesting there. So as I think of more things, I'll just throw that up there too.
Yeah. So we mentioned Quit Mormon. There's Mormon Stories as well, which I think is quite helpful. They have a very active Instagram page as well. So they often have clips of people speaking about their various experiences around the Mormon Church. It's got around 20,000 followers or so pretty significant following. And so they have some very varying guests that come and appear on the show that have all various different backgrounds and speak to various different experiences as well. But the Quit Mormon website is definitely, I think, the first resource that I would direct somebody towards if they were looking for some help in mostly leaving the Mormon faith, but to be signposted to other places that may be able to help them after leaving the Mormon Church as well. So that website, when you sent me that link in one of our first emails, was not something I'd come across before, but something that I think I will include in my toolkit going forward. It's an incredible resource. They're doing such fantastic work, especially as we discussed the almost impossible way to get your records out of the church, as explored on another episode of this show. So that kind of leads us to the end of our episode, John. And all I have to say is thank you so much for not only today's discussion and talking us through your experiences of converting into the Mormon Church in Canada. So that makes this a really unique story. Converting at 27 from Ontario is like not something that I anticipated today, having that little extra piece of information included in that. Not only kind of giving us your experiences and that monumental moment that you experienced when your shelf broke or when your switch flipped, but also for everything that you've sent me prior to this interview, which has allowed for me to further my own education in high demand religious groups and specifically the LDS Church. I really appreciate the time that you've taken to send me those resources and all of the work that you're doing with your own platform as well to create awareness and safe spaces for people to talk about these same experiences that you've gone through and maybe not known what to do with that in the moment. You're creating places for people to go to when that happens. Not many things like that exist, especially not digitally. And so I think that that's invaluable. I am going to compile all of the resources that you have sent me over the last few months and aim to include them on my website at some point, hopefully in this episode description as well. So before I say goodbye, please tell everybody where they can find you, where they can find your blog, the title of your website, and all that good stuff.
Okay, so yeah, my website, it's basically just my name. It's first initial J and then my last name, Lamothe, LAMOTHE, .net. So jlamothe.net, Lamother without the R, if you want an easy way to remember how to spell it. Yeah, I mean, I'm glad that you actually found that the stuff that I was sending helpful, because I was worried that with how frequently I was mailing you that I was becoming a pest. But yeah, I'm yeah, and I mean, I do really want to kind of facilitate, like you said, creating those safe spaces for people to talk. I'm really only in kind of the early stages of that at this point, but anyone who would like to be a part of that or whatever, again, reach out to me. I'm happy to help out in whatever way.
And I think there'll be such great things going forward from the work that you're putting into this, even, you know, as a just a kind of little personal hobby at the moment. Who knows where it will be in the next year or two? I feel like it's got potential to be an incredible project, and I feel like it already is, with some of the links that you've sent me to some of the writing that you've been doing. So I will make sure that I put a link to your website in the episode description so people can go and access that, as well as some of the other resources that you've sent me over the last few months. So thank you so much for your time today, John, for talking about your experiences and for looking at pictures of people in their Jesus jammies and magic underpants on Google with me, and telling us secrets to us secular worldly people and things that we aren't supposed to know about sacred temple ceremonies and rituals, and just being really open and honest with us about some really difficult personal life experiences that you've had.
I'm glad to have been a part of it. Thank you so much for having me. It's weirdly therapeutic, honestly, just to be able to just have a forum where you can just like get this stuff out there and not just sit on it.
I'm so glad that that's been the experience today, John. And it's an honor for me to be able to sit down and have these conversations with people. So thank you. And I really hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
You too. Have a good rest of your day.
Take care. Bye, John.
Bye.
That is the end of this week's episode. If you'd like to get in touch, you can find me at cultvaultpodcast@gmail.com or follow me on Twitter and Instagram @cultvaultpod. I'm your speaker, Casey, and this has been The Cult Vault.